Welcome friendlies, Axel here with what may actually be my first review for this channel. I've done reviews for some friends channels, but I believe this is the first one for Friendly Fire. Today I'm giving you my review of the Castlevania GBA collection. I played this on the Switch. So quick life recap, I never played these games when they originally came out. Last year I played through Aria of Sorrow for Alex over at the Turbozone. Great channel, check his out. Then a month or two ago, I also did a quick review of Circle of the Moon for the Butt Mappers. Also a great channel, you should check these guys out as well. I'll leave their links in the description. I figured I might as well finish the trilogy by going through Harmony of Dissonance. So, what are my thoughts on Harmony? What's my thoughts on these games as a whole? Well, give me a second, I'll tell you. The Castlevania GBA collection comes with Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, and Dracula X from the Super Nintendo. Also, the collection offers the abilities to save, load, and rewind your game saves, which is something all collections should have these days. The collection also has an encyclopedia for monsters and items, which does come in handy for Circle of the Moon when you're trying to figure out what enemy gives you certain card drops. Let's start with Circle of the Moon while I'm talking about it. Out of the three games, I feel Circle of the Moon was the hardest, aside from Dracula X, but I'll get to that later. Circle starts with Dracula being resurrected, and as it's happening, Master Morris, Nathan Graves, and Morris's son Hugh show up to stop it, but Dracula destroys the floor, sending Nathan and Hugh to the bottom of the castle. You play as Nathan, the teacher's pet if you will, and you're trying to save your master and stop Dracula from fully resurrecting. Along your journey you run into Hugh, the master's son, who has a chip on his shoulder, and he's trying to redeem himself in his father's eyes by saving him without your help. That pretty much sums up that story. Now, these three Game Boy Advance games are Metroidvania style games, so you're getting upgrades and you're backtracking a lot. Out of the three games, Circle of the Moon felt the clunkiest to move around, which may also be why the game felt harder. Getting double jump and run later made it a little better, but still felt off moving around and trying to swing your whip while you jump. Also, out of the three GBA games, Circle I felt looked more like the old classic Castlevania games, which is a plus. I'm not saying the game looked as good as Aria, but was a decent looking game on its own, considering it was a launch title for the GBA. The best thing about this game, well, all the Castlevania games, is that they all try to bring a new mechanic to separate themselves from the rest. In this game, it's the card system. When you defeat certain enemies, occasionally they may drop an enemy card. These cards are mixed and matched to make different magic spells. It ranges from giving your whip fire, to turning you into stone, to having ice balls circle you. It was cool getting a card, then changing the cards up just to see what each combination can do. Also, if you're playing this game on the collection, you can use the encyclopedia to see which enemies will drop what items, so you're not wasting your time killing enemies that'll never give you a card. If I had any complaints about Circle of the Moon, it's that unlike the other two games, there isn't a shop to buy and sell items. So you're constantly picking up duplicate items and they just sit there in your inventory. So what's the point of having so many of these drops? All in all, Circle of the Moon, although pissed me off sometimes, was a great first Castlevania game for the Game Boy Advance. Next up, we have Aria of Sorrow, which chronologically isn't next, but it was technically the first game I went through. Aria of Sorrow takes place in Japan in the year 2035. The town's gathering together to watch a solar eclipse when suddenly Dracula's castle appears. You play as a guy named Soma Cruz who finds himself stuck in Dracula's castle. You find out that Dracula was locked away in the eclipse and that other people are in the castle trying to gain his powers. Graphically, out of these three games, Aria is the best looking game. From good looking backgrounds to scary enemy sprites, this game was definitely one of the best looking Game Boy Advance games. And speaking of the enemies, out of these three games, I feel this game had the most enemy and boss variety. Some of my favorite creatures like the Undead Samurais were in this game. In Aria of Sorrow, they have the Soul system, which is kinda like the card system from Circle, but different. The Soul system gives you three different types of souls. Red souls, which are for attacking, blue souls, which are abilities that help you traverse different areas, and yellow souls give you boost in stats. You gain these souls by killing monsters, and most monsters in the game drop souls, so you have a huge arsenal at your disposal. My complaint for Aria of Sorrow would have to be the fact that later in the game you get some really good abilities and cool weapons, but then the game ends right after you gain them. I wish it could have had more to explore after getting these things. Now, although I didn't go through this game again on the GBA collection, I did just go through this game a few months back for a friend's channel. I did, however, jump into the collection just to see if there's any notable changes. The enemy encyclopedia for the collection does give you a little more details on enemy drops, like telling you what their souls actually do. Aria of Sorrow may not be perfect, but it's definitely one of the better Castlevania games that I've played. And out of these three games, it's my favorite. Next up we have what I feel is probably the most divisive game out of the three for me. That's Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. Harmony takes place after Dracula was defeated. You play as Just Belmont, the grandson of Simon Belmont. In this game you're trying to save your friend Liddy, who had been taken to Dracula's castle. You constantly run into Maxim, who is your friend who is also trying to save her. Surprisingly, Dracula isn't the threat in this game. Aside from Death, who you run into a bunch, you find out the identity of the real villain later in the game. So graphically, this to me is the ugliest out of the three games, and it's most likely due to the colors they use for some of the backgrounds, and the main character has this colorful outline. Also, this game had one of the worst boss areas I've ever seen in a game. One of the things I did like about moving around was you had the ability to dash back and forth. It made getting around and fighting some enemies a lot easier. Speaking of easy though, this game was way too easy. It has a lot of bosses, and I mean a lot of them, but most of them had like 2 attacks, and you could just destroy them by standing in the same spot. There were only a few times where a boss killed me, but for the most part the bosses in this game were very forgettable. I did like the item management you could use in this game. There were times where you would have to switch to a certain item to gain access to an area for a short time. Also, there's some okay box moving puzzles, but there wasn't a lot of them. Come to think of puzzles, I did like the box moving puzzles in Harmony more than the lever puzzles that were in Circle of the Moon. So the big thing they added for this game is that there's two different maps. So you later find a teleporter that allows you to switch between two different realms. The layout of the maps are the same, except enemies and items change depending on which realm of the castle you're in. Now, I at first liked this idea. It gave backtracking a whole new twist and reminded me of Cynthia of the Night, but my issue is there's certain points in the game where you can only progress to an area if you're in a certain realm, and the game doesn't really tell you that. So there were a lot of times where I was lost and would constantly go back to a teleporter to switch realms to try to figure out how I can progress further. This was my biggest complaint of the game, besides it being way too easy. Later in the game I felt like a god with so much power, equipment, and even money. Towards the end of the game they're just throwing money at you, so much that I, at the end of the game, had like 50 health potions, and never ever needed them. So I'm not saying Harmony of Dissonance is a bad game in any way. It was fun, and honestly, after struggling with Circle of the Moon a little bit, it was nice to feel that weight lifted off me going through Harmony. Now I know what you're typing into the comments right now, so stop and don't send it. Yes, Dracula X Curse's Blood is also in this collection. I also feel like this game is thrown onto everything nowadays, but I will give my thoughts on these styles of Castlevania games. It's no secret I prefer the Metroidvania style Castlevania games over the traditional old school side-scroller. Now, I'm not saying those old school games are bad, not at all, because obviously they were doing some great things when they came out. It's just the Metroidvania games I feel like offer more depth mechanically. Combat feels like it has more substance. You're able to approach things differently and experiment with loadouts, as opposed to hoping that bat that's always moving in the same pattern doesn't hit you when you try to make that jump again. Metroidvania just feels like the perfect evolution of that old school Castlevania style. And that's not a bad thing. I still jump into the old school games from time to time, but they aren't as addictive as the newer games. But if you want to jump into Dracula X, it is in this collection as well. So, the final verdict, the Castlevania GBA collection gets 2 thumbs up from me. These are some of the best Castlevania games to ever come out, and they deserve a playthrough. The other good news is that this collection won't break the bank either. It runs for 20 bucks and it's always on sale. So if you're in the mood for Castlevania, pick these up. They will certainly scratch that itch.